Hi guys, welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. And today we are chatting about the vagus nerve and how it relates to just about anybody, but specifically when it comes to performance and recovery and also chronic disease. There's a lot of really good research being done right now and a lot of information coming up on how people can potentially start to rewire their brain and their nervous systems to actually help heal a lot of chronic conditions. So there's a lot of research being done on the limbic system, which is basically how your body perceives threats. But the vagus nerve relates to that. But it's kind of a simpler way to, I guess, introduce that whole concept of being able to retrain your brain.
Gotcha. Yeah, so the vagus nerve it's an interesting one because I think I was reading about the origins of its name because it's like all over the body. And so it's kind of similar to a vagabond that's traveling all over the place and never has like one set home because it connects into all kinds of stuff, like you mentioned, like the heart, lungs, digestive system.
It goes past your voice box, which will connect to some of the therapies that are used to control it later.
So this is that gut feeling instrument.
Yes. So this is responsible. There is an actual physical and physiological reason that you get gut feelings, and it's all connected to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve also controls the gut-brain axis, which we're learning a lot more about, and potentially controls how your digestive system controls your immune system, I guess.
Yeah.
So we know that your immune system is largely based on your gut bacteria and the functions and the actions of the gut bacteria. And so the vagus nerve has a hand in controlling all of that as well. So anything that relates to the digestive system, to inflammation, immune system, all of those things are affected and I guess partly controlled by the vagus nerve.
Sure. So what makes the vagus nerve relevant? Why are we talking about it?
So we're talking about it, and first I guess I want to talk about the anatomy of the nervous system specifically, just as a refresher for anybody who doesn't know. You have two main parts of your nervous system. One part that you can control, so these are like physical actions, so moving around, moving your muscles, and the other side are things that you can't physically control. So things like digestion, heart rate, things like that, body temperature.
So flexing your bicep versus forcing food to travel down your esophagus and into your small intestine.
And so within that section of the nervous system that you have, no real control over, which again, may be different now that we have more information, but when your body's basically taking the reins and doing its thing, you have two separate sides of that section as well. So you have one side that we're all familiar with, the fight or flight side, right? So these are reactions to stress, basically. And then you have the other side, which we consider to be your rest and digest side, or resting and digesting state of the nervous system. The reason that we're talking about all of this right now is because, unfortunately, in the world we live in today, most people are operating within this fight or flight side of the nervous system almost on a daily basis.
They're stressed.
Yes, we're chronically stressed.
Yeah.
We're stressed from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, and it impacts everything. And that's not the way that life should be. We should be functioning within our rest and digest state more than the fight or flight state. Fight or flight should really only kick in when we absolutely need it to.
Right. It's supposed to be that tiny fraction where you use it as it's needed, and then you just relax right back. So like if you've ever watched a cat or any other animal that just gets spooked or flies out of the room and then 2 minutes later they're asleep.
Yes.
Like that's how these systems are supposed to work with one another, whereas somebody in today's day and age gets super stressed out about something and then they just carry that with them for a week or a month or even longer.
Well, because there's constant, stimuli throughout your entire day and every single day of the week that's continuing to trigger that fight or flight response. So what's happening is when we finally get that relaxation time, or we finally find a moment where we're able to sit down and relax, your body kind of switches over into this deep recovery mode. You've been in fight or flight for so long, and your body has a lot of things to get done that really only happen in that rest and digest state.
Right.
Which we've kind of sort of talked about before, how digestion really only happens best, detoxification happens best. There are certain functions that happen best or only happen in this rest and digest state.
You could say that the vast majority of things only happen in this
I guess
state.
you're right. Actually, most of the things, that keep you functioning well.
The fight or flight system is very good at like ultra specific things, and that's survival. Mm-hmm. Other than that, like that's all it's used for. So if you're always in that state, you're going to be at a disadvantage for everything else that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. So then what happens is, again, we have this single moment to relax, and the body goes into deep recovery mode. So this is kind of where people start to circulate between this like high urgency, high anxiety type function and this kind of like no motivation, no energy, almost depressed type state. Yeah. So I would say most of us function, circulating between those two states. Mm-hmm. Some people get stuck in one. So you do have people who, are consistently very anxious. They have this really anxious type of energy about them, and they're always moving. They're always going. They never rest. And then you have some people who are more on the depressed side, where they can't get motivation to do anything. And, they have no energy to really get anything done. So this has become normal for people to operate in just one side or to circulate so intensely between both sides. And that's where the vagus nerve comes in. The vagus nerve is kind of like the mediator between those two systems. So the vagus nerve is supposed to moderate our body's response to stress. And the vagus nerve also is our connection between our emotional mind and our physical body.
Right.
So the vagus nerve is kind of the guy that comes in and is very cool and collected and helps you see things very objectively and helps you process emotions and helps your body respond the way that it should respond.
Right. So in somebody with a properly functioning vagus nerve, some sort of external stimuli that's stressful comes in and they are able to effectively deal with it.
Yes.
Whereas someone that doesn't have the vagus nerve operating properly might have some sort of adverse reaction to that an otherwise healthy person, we'll call in this situation, could deal with.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so that vagus nerve is effectively promoting a very calm, happy energy. So we're not talking about just like resting and relaxing. We're also talking about a sense of well-being. So you're able to handle life and handle stress effectively and not let it completely, throw off your whole afternoon or throw off your whole week or your whole month kind of thing.
Yeah.
So this is something, again, that I think applies to everybody, but I think there's a huge need to talk about it, especially when it comes to health symptoms and chronic disease. So just about every person out there suffers with some sort of symptom, right? Fatigue, lack of sleep, digestive issues. Even people who don't have a diagnosed chronic disease struggle with a lot of these types of things that come about when we function too much in that fight or flight mode. So training the vagus nerve is something that's, one, possible and something that, two, I think everybody should be doing.
Yeah, and what's interesting now is that we're starting to get to that point in science where we're linking a lot of things that we saw anecdotal benefits from that might not have been necessarily fleshed out, and we can actually see what that connection is to the physical body and why it's working in that way. So some of the things that you can do are like breathing exercises. So if you've ever heard of yoga or deep breathing or meditation, like there's all these different physical elements of these practices that have been practiced for thousands of years that people kind of intuitively came upon and have been able to reproduce result after result after result. And now we're getting to that point where we're starting to figure out what that connection actually is.
Like we can explain it with
and
science.
The vagus nerve happens to be kind of that junction between the physical and the ethereal.
Yeah. Well, because I think, a lot of ancient practices like that, like yoga, we've never really been able to explain them or understand them. And some people get scared away by the fact that it seems like a very spiritual type practice.
Yeah.
But researching the vagus nerve and learning all of these things, it makes everything make so much more sense to me. Like why there's a stereotype of people who practice a lot of that stuff, like yogis specifically, who are just very, calm and collected, but they still have this sense of energy to them. And it's really interesting because I feel like the vagus nerve explains a lot of that stuff because yoga essentially combines all of these different methods that train and stimulate the vagus nerve. Yeah. So we talked about, like you said, like breathing exercises. Inversions is another thing that can help tone the vagus nerve or the vagus nerve. Inversions, getting upside down. Oh. So using an inversion table or, yoga includes a lot of inversions and inversion poses in, their practice.
Just hop into a headstand.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And you're good to go.
Right. The way that we structure our breathing, using different techniques with breathing, obviously something else that's incorporated in yoga. And then the whole element of connection. So yoga is all about connecting the mind and the body, but also connecting to other people, connecting to nature, which, again, that's kind of where it loses a lot of people. But there is a huge benefit in connection because, again, the vagus nerve is the pathway that connects, like I said before, the emotional mind.
Yeah, the mental to the physical.
Yes, and the physical body. So yoga is something that obviously you can practice. That's a way that you can train your I keep getting it wrong, the vagus nerve. But there are lots of other ways to do it too that people might feel more comfortable with. So breathing exercises are something that everybody is able to do. Everybody has access to be able to do breathing exercises. Yep. We've talked about this before about how deep belly breathing is something that activates that calming side of the nervous system. You are effectively activating your vagus nerve by doing that. Right. So diaphragmatic breathing into your belly, and then also the breathing exercises that are counted breaths, or you breathe for, a certain count, right? So inhaling for 5 seconds, holding your breath for 5 seconds, exhaling for, 10 seconds.
Trying to slow the breath down.
Yeah, slow breathing is something that helps strengthen the vagus nerve. Specifically, I think I read in one of the articles, the exhale. The exhale is where most of that vagus nerve action happens, which is why when you see certain breathing exercise structures, they're giving you a shorter inhale count and a longer exhale count.
Right. Well, the exhale is the passive movement.
Yes.
So it makes sense.
Yeah, that's true.
And then another one is voice, humming, singing, things that vibrate the core. So like back to yoga, like chanting practices. Yeah,
like that's where all this stuff came together. Because I've always wondered why that was a thing. Yeah. Like I thought it was more of like a spiritual thing. And I'm sure it is to an extent. There is a spiritual side to yoga and a lot of those practices. But physically, there's also a really good reason to be doing it. And it's that, again, the vagus nerve passes by the vocal cords. And there are certain branches of the vagus nerve that are within, I think, the larynx. I think some of those surrounding areas. So by humming or by singing, you are kind of activating that. Yeah,
vibration stimulates the nerve.
Which is kind of the same premise that some therapies are using. Right now they're studying electronic stimulation of the vagus nerve.
Yeah, I was reading about that.
For certain disease states. So mood disorders like anxiety and depression, but also things like arthritis and other inflammatory diseases. And they're seeing good results from it. Yeah. So they're stimulating.
They've done some like implants with electrical things. Yeah. And now they're trying like topical electrical stuff where you can just, I don't know, zap it and you're good to go.
Yeah. So, and that's really interesting because, again, it's connecting science to, like you said, a lot of these ancient modalities that have been used for years and years and years that nobody really understood.
We knew they worked. We didn't know why.
Yeah, exactly. So some other things, and again, these are all things that anybody out there could be doing. Cold stimulates the vagus nerve. Specifically,
people that wake up in the morning and splash the cold water on their face.
Yeah, absolutely. Something so easy for you to be doing. I think it's called like the diving reflex or something. Where you pair the cold water with holding your breath. And this is for a very short period of time. So again, just enough time to splash water on your face, or even putting like a cold compress on your face and neck can stimulate that vagus nerve.
Yeah. I also saw something about submerging your tongue in water.
Oh, I didn't read it. I didn't read anything about that. That's interesting.
Kind of an interesting one. Yeah. But there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. And then the last major way that I think people could implement right away is massage. So again, sometimes, and we know this because we know that tight muscles and muscles that are not where they should be or not functioning the way they should be can put pressure on nerves. Mm-hmm. We know that. Yeah. So, all of these muscles in your neck, and people just tend to have a tight neck and shoulders to begin with, that can impact your vagus nerve stimulation.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Massaging those muscles along the neck, massaging behind the ears, massaging the jawline, all of those things can take pressure off of that area and can help the vagus nerve work more effectively.
So really what all this is pointing to is developing some sort of conscious practice that works for you. So you've got the yoga option, you've got meditation and deep breathing. I guess you could hum habitually. There's all kinds of things that you can do to help strengthen this connection between the mental, the physical, and start to see all of these physical benefits from that connection.
Mm-hmm. Because it's not just mental. That's the whole point here. It's like, again, we've already known that your mind and body are connected and that there can be physical symptoms from something happening in your mind and vice versa. So this is a way for those two pieces to come together and to be able to have more control over some of these things happening in your life or happening in your body that for a long time we felt like we didn't have control over.
Right.
And this isn't just specifically related to mood disorders or chronic diseases. This can also apply to performance athletes. So I was also reading a lot of things about, heart rate variability. We've talked about that before. And essentially, heart rate variability is measuring your recovery. But again, now that we know that the vagus nerve is connected to our heart and basically controls our heart rate, what heart rate variability is really measuring is the strength of your vagus nerve. Mm-hmm. And what they've found in a lot of studies are that these high-performance athletes have a very strong vagus nerve.
All right, being able to turn on that parasympathetic response.
To recover.
Yeah, because that's where you rebuild, recover, and get prepared for any sort of new activity. If you're constantly in that sympathetic zone, this goes back to people trying to build muscle, and they go to the gym and just crush themselves day after day after day. You're never actually in the environment where you're building that tissue back and recovering. All of that happens outside of the gym. So same thing with an athlete. They're on the field. They're not just trying to beat the crap out of themselves 24/7. You perform for a few hours and then you've got to be able to get back into that parasympathetic state and recover so that you're ready to go again. So it would make sense that if this vagal tone is stronger in those athletes, they're going to perform a lot better and recover a lot better.
Exactly. And again, that's, basically underlining the fact that some of our strongest athletes have the strongest vagus nerve because they have the best kind of recovery practice as part of their training routine.
And you'll hear it all the time. Elite athletes that do yoga or they have different breathing techniques that they utilize or things that just keep them consistent that allow them to get from one state to another as they need to.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool because, again, I think this applies to every single person out there, but especially if you have goals related to any sort of athletic performance, and especially if you have any sort of health symptoms or chronic disease specifically, you have more control than you think you do. And exploring the vagus nerve and how to train the vagus nerve is a great place to start. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, as we start to uncover more and more about the connection of that, the connection of the gut to health, the connection of the gut to the brain, all of these things are starting to center around these connections that affect both sides. And the more we have control and techniques to manipulate those, the better off you'll be kind of across the board.
Absolutely. And I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I do too.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. If there are any topics you want us to cover, you can reach out to me at therootedrd.com or you can reach out to Kyle at hypertrofit.com. But we will see you guys next week.
Yep. See you guys next week.